Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's epic journey through the realms of Oblivion, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. Drop a comment below with your location. It's always amazing to hear from our global community of lore enthusiasts. Today we're embarking on the ultimate exploration of the Daedra, those enigmatic and powerful entities that have shaped the very fabric of reality itself. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's uncover the mysteries that lie beyond the mortal realm. To truly understand the Daedra, we must first journey beyond the boundaries of linear time to the primordial state that existed before creation itself, before Mundus, before the mortal realm as we know it. There was only the eternal dance between two fundamental forces, Anu and Padome, representing stasis and change, respectively. From their cosmic interaction emerged the Et Ada, the original spirits of pure potential, who would eventually become the divine entities known throughout mythic history. The great division between those we now call Aedra and Daedra occurred during the most pivotal moment in the prehistory of existence, the creation of Mundus itself. When Lorcan, whom the Nords call Shor, convinced or perhaps tricked many of the Et Ada to participate in creating the mortal plane, a fundamental choice was presented to these primordial beings. Those who chose to sacrifice portions of their power and essence to create Mundus became known as the Aedra, meaning our ancestors, in ancient Almeris. These entities gave of themselves, becoming bound to creation and ultimately forming the planets visible in the night sky. The Daedra, whose name means not our ancestors, were those Et Ada who refused participation in Lorcan's grand project. This refusal wasn't merely a matter of choice, but reflected their fundamental nature. The Daedra are predominantly Padomaic in their essence, embodying change, entropy, and possibility, rather than the stasis and order associated with Anuic beings. They looked upon the creation of Mundus as a limitation, a constraint upon their boundless nature, and thus stood apart. This Padomic influence is crucial to understanding Daedric nature. Unlike the Aedra, who sacrificed much of their power and became intrinsically linked to the natural laws of Mundus, the Daedra retained their full might and autonomy. They exist as beings of pure change, embodying principles that often stand in opposition to the ordered structure of mortal existence. Each Daedric prince represents a sphere of influence that reflects aspects of change, often manifesting as concepts mortals might view as disruptive or chaotic. Destruction, domination, revolution, madness, and so forth. The metaphysical composition of the Daedra differs fundamentally from both mortals and the Aedra. While mortals consist of physical flesh, and the Aedra became bound to the Mundus they helped create, the Daedra are beings composed of raw creatia, the chaotic matter of Oblivion itself, shaped by will and intent alone. This unique composition grants them immortality of a sort unknown to mortals, or even the weakened Daedra. When a Daedra's physical form is destroyed in Mundus, their essence simply returns to Oblivion, where they reform, their consciousness and identity intact. This process was documented by the Psijic Order member, Morian Zenus, during his travels through Oblivion. In his accounts, he describes witnessing lesser Daedra being slain, only to reform later, their essence gathering and coalescing back into their previous form. This immortality is not merely biological, but metaphysical. Daedra cannot truly die in any way comprehensible to mortal understanding. The unbound nature of Daedric existence also manifests in their relationship to time. While mortals experience time linearly and are bound by its progression, Daedra exist partially outside conventional temporal constraints. This doesn't mean they are completely timeless. They still experience a form of sequential existence, but their perception and experience of time differs dramatically from mortal understanding. Some scholars theorize that this differential temporal experience explains the seemingly capricious nature of Daedric interventions in mortal affairs. Following convention, the mythic event that established the laws governing Mundus. After the creation project was complete, the Daedric princes began to establish their own realms within the infinite void of Oblivion. These pocket realms became extensions of the princes themselves, physical manifestations of their spheres of influence and personalities, unlike the fixed nature of Mundus. These realms obey only the will of their Daedric creators, resulting in environments that often defy mortal logic and natural law. Molag Bal, for instance, created Cold Harbor as a twisted mockery of Nirn, a realm of suffering and enslavement that reflects his sphere of domination. Azura's Moonshadow developed as a realm of breathtaking beauty and twilight perfection, while Sheogorath's Shivering Isles manifested as a divided landscape of mania and dementia. Each realm emerged not through the collaborative sacrifice that created Mundus, but through the singular will of its prince, shaped from the raw, chaotic matter of Oblivion. The early interactions between these newly established Daedric princes were complex and often confrontational. Unlike the Daedra, who had been weakened by their contribution to Mundus, the Daedra retained their full power and ambition. Conflicts between princes over territory, influence, and the acquisition of souls became common. These conflicts rarely resulted in permanent consequences due to the immortal nature of the Daedra, but they established hierarchies and boundaries that would persist throughout the ages. One of the earliest recorded conflicts occurred between Molag Bal and Boethia, whose opposing spheres of domination and overthrow created natural enmity. Their clash resulted in the creation of several lesser planes of Oblivion that exist in the contested spaces between their primary realms. Similar conflicts between Mehrunes Dagon and Periite, or between Vermina and Hermaeus Mora, shaped the political landscape of Oblivion in ways that would later influence their interactions with mortals. The Daedric relationship with mortals began to develop soon after the stabilization of Mundus, with the Daedra either departed, weakened, or transformed into the Earthbones. The Daedra found themselves uniquely positioned to influence the developing mortal races. Unlike the distant Daedra, the Daedra could manifest their will directly, appearing to mortals and offering power, knowledge, or other boons in exchange for worship and service. These early interactions established patterns that would define Daedric mortal relations throughout history. Some princes, like Azura, developed relatively benevolent relationships with certain mortal groups, particularly the Chimer. Others, like Molag Bal or Mehrunes Dagon, pursued more explicitly predatory relationships, seeking to dominate, corrupt, or destroy mortal civilizations. Among the most significant early interactions was the relationship between Azura and the Chimer. According to Dunmer religious texts, Azura guided the prophet Veleth and his followers away from the decadence of Altmer society in the Somerset Isles, leading them to the land that would become Morrowind. This established a tradition of Daedra worship that would distinguish Chimer and later Dunmer culture from other elven societies, which typically favored Daedric worship. The metaphysical nature of the Daedra also influenced how they interacted with the mortal plane. Unable to manifest fully in Mundus without significant magical effort or invitation, the Daedra developed various methods of extending their influence across the barrier between realms. The creation of artifacts, the establishment of cults, the use of mortal champions, and the formation of pacts and contracts all became tools through which Daedric will could be expressed in the mortal world. Daedric artifacts represent one of the most tangible expressions of this influence. Objects like Azura's star, Mehrunes' razor, or the mace of Molag Bal contain portions of their creator's essence, allowing their power to exist within Mundus without requiring the full manifestation of the prince. These artifacts often seek worthy wielders, drawing mortals into the schemes of their Daedric creators. The early Daedric cults emerged as another vector of influence. While modern scholars often view these organizations through the lens of later imperial theology, which categorized Daedra worship as inherently evil, early Daedric cults varied dramatically in their practices and moral orientations. Cults dedicated to Meridia, for instance, often focused on the destruction of undead and the celebration of life, while those following Namira embraced decay and reveled in the repulsive. The relationship between the Daedra and the concept of souls also took shape during this early period. Unlike the Daedra, who had invested portions of their own essence into creation. The Daedra maintained an outsider's interest in the unique metaphysical structure of mortal souls. Many princes began to covet these souls, seeing in them sources of power, entertainment, or servants that could be bound to their realms after mortal death. This soul hunger led to the development of various forms of soul magic and bargaining. Molag Bal's creation of the first vampires, according to some legends, represented an early attempt to claim mortal souls through corruption rather than consent. Other princes developed more contractual approaches, offering mortals power or knowledge during life in exchange for service in Oblivion after death. The formation of Oblivion's political structure also occurred during this formative period. While the 16 most powerful Daedric princes established their major realms, countless lesser Daedra organized themselves into complex hierarchies beneath these greater powers. Some, like the Dremora, developed sophisticated social structures with their own codes of honor and advancement. Others remained more chaotic, their forms and behaviors shifting according to the whims of their prince. The Dremora, in particular, emerged as one of the most organized and militaristic Daedric societies, serving primarily Mehrunes Dagon, but sometimes found in the service of other princes. The Dremora established a rigid caste system with clearly defined ranks from the lowly churls to the commanding Markinaz and Valkinaz. Their society focused on conquest, discipline, and strict adherence to hierarchy, values that reflected their primary allegiance to the Prince of Destruction. Other Daedric societies developed along different lines. The Golden Saints and Dark Seducers of Sheogorath's realm formed two opposing but complementary forces, while the Winged Twilights of Azora's own shadow embodied their mistress's aesthetic perfection and twilight nature. Each society of Lesser Daedra reflected aspects of their prince's sphere, creating a diverse ecosystem of Daedric life throughout Oblivion. The boundaries between different types of Daedra were not always clear-cut, however. Lesser Daedra could sometimes transfer allegiance between princes, either voluntarily or as spoils of conflict between greater powers. Some Daedra existed as independent entities, bound to no prince, but surviving in the interstices between the major realms of Oblivion. These unaligned Daedra often became objects of interest to mortal summoners, who found them easier to bind and control than those protected by a prince's authority. As the early eras progressed, the relationship between Daedra and mortals continued to evolve. The development of conjuration magic gave mortals new tools for summoning and binding Daedra, while the spread of organized religion, particularly the imperial cult, created new theological frameworks for understanding and categorizing Daedric entities. The Daedra, for their part, adapted to these changing circumstances, finding new methods of influence and interaction. as direct worship became increasingly taboo in many parts of Tamriel. The Daedric princes represent the apex of power within the chaotic realms of Oblivion, while countless lesser Daedra populate the infinite planes. Only 17 entities have attained the status of prince, beings of such immense power and distinct identity that they command entire realms shaped to their will. Each prince embodies a specific sphere of influence, a conceptual domain that defines their nature and the extent of their power. Traditionally, scholars recognized 16 princes until the events of the late Third Era revealed Chigalag, the Prince of Order, as a separate entity from Sheogorath. This revelation fundamentally altered our understanding of Daedric hierarchies and the complex relationships between these powerful beings. At the conceptual foundation of Daedric existence lies the principle of spheres, metaphysical domains that each prince embodies and controls. These spheres are not merely areas of interest or expertise, but fundamental aspects of their being. Mehrunes Dagon does not simply control destruction. He is destruction incarnate, the embodiment of revolutionary upheaval and catastrophic change. Similarly, Boethia doesn't merely influence plots and betrayals, but exists as the living principle of overthrow itself. Azura, the Prince of Dusk and Dawn, claims dominion over the transitional moments between day and night. Her sphere encompasses twilight states, both literal and metaphorical, including prophecy and fate, the transitions between present and future. Her influence manifests most strongly during these liminal periods, and her worshippers often conduct rituals at dawn and dusk to maximize their connection to her power. The Dunmer have maintained the strongest cultural ties to Azura, who guided their ancestors and later transformed the Chimer into the Dunmer after the betrayal of the Tribunal. Boethia represents the sphere of deceit, conspiracy, and unlawful overthrow of authority. As the prince who illuminates lies and tests the faithful through adversity, Boethia demands strength and cunning from followers. Dunmer culture venerates Boethia as the entity who consumed the Altmer god Trinimac and revealed the lies of the Aedra to the Proto-Dunmer, setting them on their path of Daedra worship. Throughout history, Boethia has shown consistent interest in mortal affairs, particularly in fomenting revolution and challenging established power structures. Clavicus Vile embodies the sphere of wishes and bargains. His deals with mortals are legendary for their unexpected and often ironic outcomes, as he fulfills the letter of agreements while subverting their intent. Always accompanied by his hound Barbas, Vile takes particular delight in transactions where mortals fail to specify their desires precisely. His influence in Tamrielic history has been subtle but persistent, with numerous tales of ill-fated bargains appearing across cultures, particularly among Bretons and Imperials. Hermaeus Mora, the gardener of men, rules over the spheres of knowledge, memory, and fate. His realm of Apocrypha serves as a repository for all forbidden knowledge, filled with endless libraries and labyrinths of information. Unlike many princes who demand worship, Mora primarily seeks to collect knowledge and secrets, offering forbidden information in exchange for new additions to his collection. His interactions with mortals often involve scholars and mages seeking knowledge beyond mortal understanding. Her scene claims the sphere of the hunt, representing the primal thrill of pursuit and predation. His influence extends to all hunters, from mortal sportsmen to natural predators. But he is best known as the creator and patron of lycanthropes. Her scene's hunting grounds serve as the afterlife for werewolves and those who pledge themselves to his endless chase. His presence in mortal affairs tends to be more direct than many princes, with his wild hunt occasionally manifesting in mortal realms. Chigalag, the Prince of Order, represents logical progression and perfect structure. For millennia, his existence remained hidden as he was cursed to live as his antithesis, Sheogorath, Prince of Madness. This transformation, imposed by the other princes who feared his growing power, occurred at the end of each era during an event known as the Grey March. Only at the close of the Third Era was this cycle broken, allowing Chigalag to exist independently once more. Unlike most princes, Chigalag's interactions with Nirn have been minimal, his influence largely erased from historical record during his long imprisonment. Malakath, sometimes called Maluk or Malak, embodies the spheres of outcasts, oaths, and vengeance. Once the Adric entity Trinamak, he was transformed after being consumed by Boethia, an event that also led to his followers becoming the Orsimer. His realm, the Ashpit, reflects his harsh philosophy that the strong survive through struggle and the weak deserve their fate. Malakath maintains the strongest connection with Orsimer culture, serving as their primary deity, an ancestral figure, though he shows little interest in worship and more in action and strength, demonstrated through trials. Mehrunes Dagon controls the spheres of destruction, revolution, ambition, and energy. His destructive nature has made him one of the most overtly antagonistic princes toward Nirn, with multiple attempted invasions throughout history. The Oblivion crisis of the Third Era represents his most ambitious attempt to conquer the mortal plane, orchestrated through the assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII and his heirs. Despite these aggressive actions, some revolutionary movements have worshipped Dagon as a force of necessary change, seeing destruction as a prerequisite for rebirth and renewal. Molag Bal, the Prince of Domination, embodies enslavement, corruption, and vampiric bloodlines. His realm of Cold Harbor stands as a twisted mockery of Nirn, where slaves toil endlessly under leaden skies. Bal's interest in Nirn has been consistent and malevolent, with the plane meld of the Second Era representing his most direct attempt to merge Nirn with his realm, his creation of the first vampires through the ritual violation of Lamay Ball, established one of his most enduring influences on the mortal plane, creating a lineage of undead that continues to serve his interests. Namira represents the sphere of ancient darkness, revulsion, and decay. Her followers, known as the Forgotten, embrace the repulsive aspects of existence that most mortals shun. Her influence manifests most strongly in cannibalistic cults and those who dwell in darkness, with her worshippers often living as beggars or outcasts while secretly practicing their reviled rituals. Unlike more aggressive princes, Namira's approach to mortal affairs tends towards subtle corruption rather than direct intervention, spreading her influence through gradual acceptance of the repulsive. Nocturnal claims the spheres of night, darkness, and luck. Known as the Night Mistress and patron of thieves, her realm of Evergloam exists in perpetual twilight. The Thieves' Guild across multiple provinces maintains a special relationship with her, with senior members becoming nightingales, agents who protect Nocturnal's influence on Nirn, in exchange for supernatural abilities and an afterlife in her service. Her influence extends beyond mere thievery to all who operate in shadows or rely on fortune, making her one of the most widely acknowledged princes across Tamriel. Periite, often considered the weakest of the princes, governs the spheres of pestilence, natural order, and tasks. Despite his lower status, his domain of ordering the lowest forms of Oblivion demonstrates the hierarchical nature of Daedric society. His influence on Nirn typically manifests through diseases and plagues, which his followers interpret as necessary components of natural cycles. The afflicted mortals, who willingly host his diseases, serve as his most devoted servants, believing their suffering brings them closer to understanding his ordered vision of existence. Sanguine embodies debauchery, hedonistic revelry, and darker passions. His realm, a collection of pocket planes collectively called the Myriad Realms of Revelry, hosts endless parties catering to every imaginable vice. His interactions with mortals often involve tempting them into excess, not necessarily for malevolent purposes, but simply to encourage the abandonment of restraint. Throughout history, Sanguine has appeared in various guises to lure mortals into memorable misadventures. With his artifacts, particularly the Rose, changing hands through drinking contests and hedonistic challenges. Sheogorath, Prince of Madness, rules over the realm of insanity and creativity. His shivering isles, divided between the manic and demented aspects of madness, reflect the dual nature of his sphere. Originally created through Jiggalag's transformation, Sheogorath eventually became an independent entity after the events of the late Third Era. His influence touches artists, visionaries, and those suffering mental afflictions. Unlike many princes, Sheogorath frequently walks among mortals in disguise, causing chaos and inspiration in equal measure through seemingly random interventions that often contain hidden purpose. Vermina controls the sphere of nightmares and psychological torment. Her realm of quagmire consists of ever-shifting dreamscapes designed to trap and terrify mortal souls. Through the dream stride, a state achieved via the alchemical substance Vermina's torpor, her followers can physically traverse distances while appearing to sleep, though at great risk. Throughout history, Vermina has shown particular interest in memories and dream experiences, collecting them much as Hermaeus Mora collects knowledge, though for purposes of torment rather than cataloging. The final recognized prince, Mephala, embodies sex, lies, murder, and secrets. Known as the web spinner, she weaves complex plots that often set mortals against one another for her amusement. Her influence in Dunmer culture is particularly strong, where she forms part of the triumvirate of anticipations alongside Azura and Boethia. The assassination guild, known as the Morag Tong, originated from her worship, executing legally sanctioned murders that maintain a complex balance of power in Dunmer society. Her artifact, the Ebony Blade, strengthens when used to kill those who trust its wielder, embodying her sphere of betrayal. The relationships between these 17 princes range from outright hostility to temporary alliances of convenience. Few permanent friendships exist among these beings, whose fundamental natures often place them in opposition. Boethia and Molag Bal maintain one of the oldest and most bitter rivalries, their spheres of revolutionary overthrow and domination naturally conflicting. Their followers often find themselves in direct opposition, with Boethia's emphasis on overcoming challenges through strength, directly contradicting Bal's philosophy of enslaving the weak. Beyond the stars that pierce the night sky of Nirn lies the infinite void of Oblivion, a dimension of raw, chaotic creation that dwarfs Mundus in both scale and complexity. But unlike the fixed, stable reality of the mortal plane, Oblivion exists as an endless expanse of possibility, punctuated by countless pocket realms that float like islands in a limitless sea of potential. These realms vary tremendously in size, from tiny domains housing a single structure or landscape to vast territories that could encompass all of Tamriel many times over. The cosmological structure of Oblivion defies mortal comprehension. It is not merely elsewhere, but exists as a fundamental counterpart to Mundus. Only shadows melting into darkness, and yet it holds secrets beyond our wildest imaginings, separated by the liminal barriers, yet connected through the stars. The holes punched in reality when Magnus and the Magna G fled the creation of the mortal plane. These stars serve as conduits for magicka from Aetherius, but they also represent weaknesses in the fabric that separates realms, points where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. The metaphysical geography of Oblivion follows no consistent rules. Spatial relationships between realms shift constantly, with distances expanding or contracting, based on the will of the princes and other factors incomprehensible to mortal minds. A journey that takes moments on one occasion might require centuries on another, not because the traveler has changed, but because Oblivion itself has reconfigured. This fluid geography makes conventional mapping impossible, forcing travelers to rely on magical means of navigation or the guidance of Daedric entities. At the center of this chaotic cosmos lie the major realms of the Daedric princes. These planes represent the most stable and defined territories within Oblivion, anchored by the immense will of their rulers. Each realm manifests as a physical expression of its prince's sphere and personality. Environments literally shaped by consciousness rather than natural forces. Mehrunes Dagon's Deadlands exemplify this principle with stark clarity. This realm presents a nightmarish landscape of volcanic activity, barren wastelands, and towering citadels forged from black metal. Rivers of lava cut through scorched plains where nothing grows, while the sky burns with an eternal crimson glow. The very air feels charged with destructive potential, making breathing painful for mortal visitors. Throughout the Deadlands, massive forges operated by Dremora produce the weapons and armor used in Dagon's repeated attempts to invade Nirn. The scamps that serve as menial laborers in these forges endure brutal conditions, their flesh regularly burned and regenerated in an endless cycle that reflects Dagon's philosophy of destruction and renewal. Sigil Towers, the massive structures that anchored Oblivion gates during the crisis of the Third Era, rise from strategic locations throughout the realm. In stark contrast to the blistering heat of the Deadlands, Molag Bal's realm of Cold Harbor presents a twisted mockery of Nirn, frozen in eternal suffering. Here, the skies hang heavy with leaden clouds that never part, casting perpetual gloom over landscapes that perversely mirror familiar Tamrielic locations. Cities resembling Wayrest or imperial settlements stand in ruins, their architecture distorted into more angular, threatening forms. Only shadows melting into darkness, while their streets fill with soul-shriven slaves who endure endless torment. Cold Harbor's central feature, the endless stair, spirals upward through layers of increasingly severe torment, leading eventually to Molag Bal's personal fortress. Within this massive structure, the prince maintains his collection of artifacts stolen from Nirn and conducts experiments to perfect new methods of domination and suffering. Souls shriven, mortal souls denied the natural cycle of death and afterlife wander the realm in hollow agony, their very existence a testament to Baal's power to corrupt even the fundamental processes of mortality. Azura's realm of Moonshadow stands as perhaps the most beautiful of the Oblivion planes, accessible to mortal visitation. Unlike the overtly hostile environments of the Deadlands or Cold Harbor, Moonshadow presents visitors with vistas of breathtaking beauty. Rose-colored glass cities floating on islands of silver, golden rivers flowing with liquid starlight, and forests of translucent crystal trees that chime melodically in the constant twilight breeze. The realm exists in perpetual dusk and dawn, the liminal times sacred to Azura, with the sky painted in watercolor hues of lavender, amber, and rose that never fully transition to either day or night. This eternal twilight creates an atmosphere of anticipation, a moment forever on the cusp of transformation that reflects Azura's connection to transition and potential. Visitors to Moonshadow often report feelings of overwhelming awe that border on painful ecstasy. The Dunmer mystic Tarvin Fear, who claimed to have visited the realm through dream walking, wrote that the beauty of Moonshadow is not merely aesthetic, but cuts to the very soul, revealing the perfection that might have been and might yet be. The Shivering Isles, realm of Sheogorath, presents perhaps the most psychologically complex landscape in Oblivion. Physically divided into the regions of mania and dementia, the realm embodies the dual nature of madness, creativity and despair, brilliance and horror. In mania, vibrant colors assault the senses, with flora and fauna displaying impossible hues and behaviors. Massive mushroom trees tower over fields of butterflies, whose wings shift patterns with each observer's glance. The settlements here buzz with frenetic energy, their inhabitants pursuing artistic and intellectual obsessions with unhinged enthusiasm. Crossing into dementia reveals a stark transformation. The vibrant colors drain away, replaced by muted grays and sickly greens. Twisted, thorny vegetation clutches at travelers, while the architecture turns threatening. Buildings that appear to weep, or structures designed to induce claustrophobia and disorientation. The residents of dementia exhibit paranoia, melancholy, and other manifestations of madness's darker aspects. Hermaeus Mora's realm of Apocrypha presents a stark contrast to the emotional landscapes of the Shivering Isles, or the aesthetic perfection of Moonshadow. Here, knowledge itself forms the building blocks of reality. Endless corridors of books stretch in all directions, forming labyrinthine libraries that constantly rearrange themselves to prevent visitors from mapping their surroundings. Black oceans of ink separate islands of knowledge, with tentacles occasionally rising from the depths to drag unwary scholars into the abyssal depths. The atmosphere of Apocrypha feels thick with information. Whispers of secrets float on currents of stale air, while the walls themselves occasionally form mouths to recite forgotten lore. Everything in the realm exists to serve its purpose as a repository of knowledge, with even the Daedric servants appearing as twisted parodies of scholars and guardians. Beyond these major realms lie countless smaller planes, some ruled by lesser Daedra, who have carved out territories of their own. Others existing as experimental spaces where princes test new concepts or store particularly interesting acquisitions. The Fields of Regret, domain of Clavicus Vile, contain rolling countryside that appears almost idyllic until visitors notice the subtle wrongness. Shadows that fall in impossible directions, animals that speak in riddles, and contracts written in the patterns of falling leaves. The hunting grounds of Hircine present an endless forest where predator and prey engage in perpetual chase. The seasons shift unpredictably from lush summer to harsh winter in moments, forcing hunters to adapt constantly. Lycanthropes who pledge themselves to Hircine find their afterlife here, transformed into ideal predatory forms to participate in the prince's great hunt for eternity. The boundaries between these realms and Mundus have not remained constant throughout history. In the early Merethic era, before the establishment of the Alessian Empire, travel between Oblivion and Nirn occurred with relative frequency. Daedric princes could manifest directly on the mortal plane, while powerful summoners could open stable portals, allowing passage in both directions. The watershed moment in Daedra-mortal relations came with the Alessian Rebellion and the subsequent establishment of the Covenant with Akatosh. When Alessia prayed for divine assistance against her Aliad oppressors, Akatosh responded by creating the Dragonfire's ritual and establishing the liminal barriers, metaphysical constructs that prevented direct Daedric manifestation on Nirn, as long as the barriers remained sealed by the lighting of the Dragonfires by a Dragonborn Emperor. The exact nature of these barriers remains poorly understood, even by the most accomplished conjurers. They do not prevent all contact between realms. Lesser Daedra can still be summoned briefly, and communication with the princes remains possible. But they specifically block the princes from manifesting their full power directly on Nirn. The barriers also prevent the establishment of permanent portals between realms, limiting cross-dimensional travel to temporary conjurations or rare natural convergences. Throughout the eras, the strength of these barriers has waxed and waned. During periods when the Dragonfires burned strongly, Daedric influence diminished to subtle manipulations and the actions of mortal cultists. When an emperor died and the fires temporarily extinguished, the barriers weakened until a new emperor could perform the ritual, creating windows of opportunity for Daedric intervention. The most dramatic failure of these protections occurred during the Oblivion crisis, when the assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII and all his the realms of Oblivion teem with countless entities beyond the princes themselves. These lesser Daedra exist in complex hierarchical structures that mirror yet distinctly differ from mortal social organizations. Understanding these lesser entities and their relationships provides crucial insight into how Daedric influence manifests across both Oblivion and Mundus. The most well-documented of these lesser Daedric entities are the Dremora, primarily associated with Mehrunes Dagon, but occasionally found serving other princes. Their society operates under a rigid military structure, with clearly defined ranks, determining both social status and battlefield role. At the lowest tier stand the Churls, foot soldiers who form the bulk of Dremora forces. Above them, Kinvol serve as specialized fighters, while Kinreeve function as officers leading small units. The higher ranks include Kine Marcher, who command larger forces, and the elite Marquinaz, who answer directly to their prince. At the apex of Dremora society stand the Valkanaz, the prince's blood, who form the inner circle of advisors and generals. This hierarchical structure extends beyond mere titles. Each rank possesses distinct armor styles and weapon privileges, with higher-ranking Dremora wielding increasingly powerful enchanted weapons and wearing more elaborate armor. The Dremora Code of Honor binds all ranks in loyalty to their prince, while establishing protocols for advancement through combat prowess and successful service. Dremora society values strength, cunning, and unwavering loyalty to their hierarchical structure. Unlike many other Daedra, they possess a sophisticated language and written culture. Equally structured but fundamentally different are the Golden Saints and Dark Seducers, who serve Sheogorath in the Shivering Isles. These two groups represent the dualistic nature of their prince's realm, with Auriel governing mania and Mazkin controlling dementia. Despite their opposing natures, both groups maintain similar hierarchies, with ranks including regular soldiers, officers, and elite royal guards who protect key locations in New Sheoth. The rivalry between these groups transcends mere territorial disputes. Aurael embody the manic aspects of Sheogorath's fear, pride, excessive zeal, and brilliant but unstable creativity. Their golden armor gleams with meticulous polish, and they carry themselves with almost painful precision. Mazkin, conversely, represent the demented aspects: paranoia, melancholy, and calculating cruelty. Their dark armor absorbs light, and they move with fluid, predatory grace. Despite their differences, both groups demonstrate absolute loyalty to Sheogorath, setting aside their animosity when his will demands cooperation. Atronachs represent a fundamentally different category of lesser Daedra. Unlike the humanoid Dremora or Saints, Atronachs exist as elemental manifestations, living embodiments of primal forces. The most commonly encountered varieties include flame, frost, storm, and flesh Atronachs, though rarer types, such as iron and stone Atronachs, have been documented by conjurers from the Arcane University. These entities lack conventional intelligence, operating instead on instinctual patterns tied to their elemental nature. Flame Atronachs move with dance-like fluidity, their bodies composed of constantly shifting fire, contained within a roughly humanoid form. Frost Atronachs lumber with ponderous strength, their massive ice crystal bodies capable of withstanding tremendous damage. Storm Atronachs exist in a state of perpetual, violent motion, their rock fragments held together by crackling electrical energy that lashes out at nearby threats. The nature of Atronachs raises intriguing metaphysical questions. Many scholars theorize that these entities represent the most basic form of Daedric manifestation, raw creatia shaped into elemental form without the complexity of higher consciousness. This theory gains support from the observation that Atronachs reform in Oblivion after destruction, with less individuality than more complex Daedra, representing a type of building block in the Daedric ecosystem. Beyond these well-documented categories exist numerous specialized Daedra associated with particular princes. Winged Twilights serve Azura as messengers and attendants, their avian features and delicate wings allowing swift movement through the twilight skies of Moonshadow. Spider Daedra, primarily associated with Mephala, combine humanoid torsos with arachnid lower bodies, spinning webs of both silk and intrigue. The fearsome Hunger serve Boethia, their emaciated forms and insatiable appetites, making them effective torturers and interrogators. Some of the most unusual lesser Daedra are the morphoid entities, Daedra capable of substantial shapeshifting. The Hern and morphoid Daedra, documented by Imperial battle mages during the Oblivion Crisis, demonstrated abilities to alter their forms in response to threats, adopting characteristics suited to their immediate needs. Unlike conventional shapeshifters, who change between set forms, these entities possess fluid morphology that allows continuous adaptation. Scamps represent one of the most numerous and least powerful categories of lesser Daedra. Standing roughly half the height of an average human, these creatures serve as messengers, servants, and cannon fodder for various princes. Their limited intelligence and physical weakness make them objects of derision, even among other Daedra. Yet their utility for simple tasks ensures their continued existence in large numbers. The relationship between these various Daedric types follows patterns that reflect the hierarchical nature of Oblivion itself. Higher-order Daedra command those beneath them with absolute authority, creating chains of command that ultimately lead to the princes. This system allows princes to exert control over vast numbers of lesser entities without directly managing each one. When lesser Daedra are destroyed, either in Oblivion or on Mundus, they undergo a process colloquially termed Creatia recycling by conjurers. Unlike true death experienced by mortals, a slain Daedra's essence returns to the chaotic waters of Oblivion, often to a specific location within their prince's realm, designated for reformation over time, varying from hours to years, depending on the Daedra's complexity and their prince's will. This essence reconstitutes into their previous form, complete with memories and personality intact. The art of conjuration ranks among the most controversial magical disciplines practiced across Tamriel. Unlike other schools that manipulate the physical world or the caster's own energies, conjuration reaches across dimensional boundaries to command entities with their own will and consciousness. From humble beginnings in early Alderi society to the sophisticated techniques employed by imperial battle mages, the practices of summoning and binding Daedra have evolved through millennia of magical experimentation. The fundamental principles of Daedric summoning rest upon the metaphysical relationship between Mundus and Oblivion. Despite the liminal barriers established after the Alessian Rebellion, certain pathways between realms remain accessible to skilled mages. These connections function through what early Dareni conjurers called sympathetic resonance, the principle that similar energies across different planes can be aligned to create temporary bridges. By establishing this resonance through specific ritual components, conjurers can open momentary portals through which Daedric entities may pass. The earliest documented Daedric summoning techniques originated among the Proto-Altmer of the Middle Merethic era. Archaeological excavations near Cloudrest in Somerset uncovered ritual circles dating to this period, their design incorporating crystalline focus points arranged in patterns that correspond to certain Daedric signatures. These early summoners worked primarily with elemental Daedra, such as Atronox, entities whose simpler natures made them easier to control than more intelligent Daedric beings. The Aldmeri approach to conjuration emphasized harmony and negotiation rather than domination. Their rituals included elaborate offerings and precisely calculated astrological timing to contact specific Daedric entities during moments when the barriers between worlds naturally thinned. This relatively balanced approach changed dramatically during the late Merethic era, with the rise of Iliad civilization in Cyrodiil. The Heartland High Elves developed far more aggressive binding techniques, creating magical shackles that could force Daedra into service against their will. The infamous Wild Hunt rituals practiced in certain Iliad city-states involved binding dozens of Daedric entities simultaneously, compelling them to merge into composite abominations that the Iliad sorcerer kings unleashed against their enemies. The tools of Iliad conjurers reflected their domination-focused approach. Varla stones served as power sources for maintaining bindings over extended periods, while specialized soul gems were developed to temporarily contain Daedric essences during the binding process. The most powerful Ayleid sorcerers created Welkind-infused binding rods, crystalline staves that could instantly subdue lesser Daedra and force them into service without elaborate ritual preparation. The fall of Ayleid's civilization following the Alessian Rebellion led to a significant shift in conjuration practices. The early First Era saw the emergence of distinctly human approaches to Daedric summoning, influenced by both Nedic shamanic traditions and the techniques learned from their former Ayleid masters. The Alessian Order developed highly structured summoning methods that incorporated extensive theological safeguards, reflecting their concern with maintaining clear boundaries between Aedric and Daedric influences. Moruk's followers created the first comprehensive classification system for Daedric entities, categorizing them by risk level and appropriate binding strengths. This system, recorded in the Catalogus Daedra, established protocols that remained influential in imperial conjuration practices for thousands of years. The Second Era brought revolutionary developments in conjuration through the work of Vanus Galerian and the early Mages Guild, rejecting both the domination-focused Ayleid methods and the excessively cautious Alessian approaches. Galerian developed what he termed contractual conjuration, a system based on clearly defined agreements between summoner and summoned. These techniques reduced the risk of Daedric rebellion or unintended consequences by establishing precise parameters for service before the summoning occurred. Galerian's breakthrough came from his recognition that Daedric entities, particularly those of higher intelligence, responded more reliably to binding terms they had accepted rather than those forced upon them. His standardized conjuration contracts specified duration of service, actions required, compensation offered, and conditions for termination. By incorporating these terms into the summoning ritual itself, the magical energies that brought the Daedra to Mundus simultaneously established the parameters of its service. The Mages Guild's conjuration department further refined these techniques through the work of Galerian's student, Celeris, who developed the sevenfold binding method still taught to advanced conjurers. This approach creates 7 layers of magical constraint, each addressing a different aspect of the Daedra's potential resistance. Physical form, magical ability, communication, perception, movement, duration, and dismissal. By carefully calibrating each layer, a skilled conjurer can maintain control over powerful entities while still allowing them sufficient agency to accomplish complex tasks. The Psijic Order, operating from their island of Artaeum, pursued an entirely different approach to Daedric interaction. Rather than summoning Daedra to Mundus, Psijic mystics developed techniques for projecting their consciousness into Oblivion, while leaving their physical bodies behind. This method, termed Daedric visitation in their texts, allowed for communication and negotiation with Daedric entities in their native realms, without the risks associated with physical manifestation on Mundus. Rite Master Iacasis documented these techniques in his discourse on the plural natures, describing how properly trained mystics could align their mental energies with specific frequencies of oblivion to create temporary presence in targeted realms. The Third Era saw the refinement of conjuration into increasingly specialized branches. The Imperial Battle Mage Corps under Zurin Arctus developed combat-focused summoning techniques that prioritized speed and reliability over power or duration. These methods allowed for near instantaneous deployment of Daedric allies in battle situations, though the entities summoned remained present for only brief periods. Academic conjuration developed along different lines, particularly at the Arcane University, under the guidance of Raminus Paulus. His Principia Conjurationis established the theoretical framework still used to categorize different summoning approaches: momentary, temporary, extended, and permanent. Each category required progressively more complex preparation and energy expenditure, but offered greater utility for research purposes. Throughout these developments, the ethical dimensions of conjuration remained hotly contested. The College of Winterhold maintained a relatively permissive approach, which held that conjurers bore personal responsibility for their summonings, but should not face institutional restrictions beyond basic safety protocols. This position contrasted sharply with the Imperial Synod's highly regulated approach, which categorized conjuration techniques into permitted and forbidden categories based on both safety concerns and theological considerations. Famous conjurers throughout history have contributed significantly to the field's advancement, often through practical innovation rather than theoretical work. Finaster of Morvenskar developed specialized techniques for binding multiple Daedra simultaneously, while maintaining separate control parameters for each. A method that allowed for complex, cooperative actions between different types of summoned entities. The infamous conjurer Manimarco took binding techniques in darker directions, developing methods to permanently trap Daedra within mortal bodies, creating the first true Daedric possession rather than mere summoning. These techniques involved creating metaphysical hooks within the victim's soul structure that Daedric entities could latch onto, allowing them to remain on Mundus without conventional binding constraints. Modern conjurers typically learn from traditions that blend these various historical approaches. The standard curriculum at most magical institutions begins with the summoning of simple bound weapons. Technically, Daedric entities shaped into weapon form rather than physical objects, before progressing to Atronox, and finally to more intelligent Daedric servants. Each stage incorporates both practical binding techniques and theoretical understanding of the metaphysical principles involved. Throughout the provinces of Tamriel, the worship of Daedric princes has taken innumerable forms. From open veneration in temples to hidden rituals performed in moonlit groves. These varied practices reflect not only the diverse nature of the princes themselves, but also the cultural contexts in which their worship developed. A most established and socially integrated form of Daedra worship exists among the Dunmer of Morrowind. Prior to the Red Year, Dunmer society openly venerated what they called the Anticipations, Azura, Boethia, and Mephala, as central figures in their religious pantheon. These three princes were understood not as evil entities, but as testing ancestors who guided the Dunmer through challenge and adversity. Temples dedicated to these princes stood in major cities throughout Morrowind, with elaborate ceremonies conducted by trained priests rather than secretive cultists. The relationship between the Dunmer and these princes dates back to the prophet Veloth, who led the Chimer away from Somerset under Boethia's guidance. According to Dunmer theology, Boethia consumed the Altmer god Trinimac and revealed the truth to the Proto-Dunmer, establishing a covenant that would define their culture for millennia. This event, recorded in the Changed Ones, represents one of the earliest documented instances of a Daedric prince directly shaping the development of an entire civilization. Azura's worship among the Dunmer takes on particular significance at dawn and dusk, the transitional moments sacred to her sphere. The Ashlanders, nomadic Dunmer who maintain traditional practices even during the tribunal's reign, preserve the most authentic forms of this worship. Their wise women served as oracles through whom Azura would sometimes speak, delivering prophecies and guidance. These seers occupied positions of tremendous respect within Ashlander society, their visions helping to guide tribal movements and major decisions. Ashlander rituals dedicated to Azura typically involve the burning of sacred herbs gathered at twilight, creating smoke that carries prayers to the prince. The most important ceremonies occur during the equinoxes, when day and night achieve perfect balance, reflecting Azura's liminal nature. The fall of the tribunal and the catastrophic events of the Red Year fundamentally transformed Dunmer religious practices. As the new temple emerged, worship of the reclamations, the restored anticipations, plus Mehrunes Dagon, gained renewed prominence. This transition was not merely a restoration of ancient practices, but a synthesis that incorporated elements from both traditional Daedra worship and tribunal ceremonies. In stark contrast to the open Daedra worship of Morrowind stands the secretive cult of the Dark Brotherhood, devoted to Sithis. While technically not a Daedric prince, Sithis represents a primordial force of change and dissolution that operates through similar metaphysical principles. The Brotherhood's theology, outlined in their internal text, the Five Tenets, establishes a rigid code of conduct centered around ritualized assassination as a form of worship. Each kill, performed according to contract, is considered a sacrament that sends souls to the void, Sithis' domain. The Dark Brotherhood's organizational structure reveals much about their theological understanding. At the top of their hierarchy stands the Night Mother, believed to be the spectral bride of Sithis, who communicates his will to the listener. Below the listener serve the Speakers, who distribute contracts, and the Silencers, who carry out especially sensitive assassinations. Rituals within the Dark Brotherhood focus primarily on communion with the Night Mother and the proper execution of contracts. The Black Sacrament, the ritual by which potential clients contact the Brotherhood, involves the construction of an effigy from human body parts, encircled with candles and stabbed repeatedly while reciting the prayer, "Sweet Mother, sweet Mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear." Among the Khajiit of elsewhere, Daedric worship takes forms barely recognizable to imperial theologians. The Khajiit pantheon incorporates several Daedric princes under different names and with significantly altered characteristics. Azura plays a central role in Khajiit creation mythology as the entity who shaped the Khajiit from the forest people, binding them to the lunar cycles and establishing their unique physiological relationship with the moons. Far from the twilight goddess of Dunmer tradition, Khajiit Azura represents a direct creator deity whose blood relationship with the Khajiit justifies her veneration. Hermora appears in Khajiit theology as the Tides, an entity associated with memory and forbidden knowledge. Unlike other cultures that approach this prince with fear and caution, certain Khajiit scholars actively seek Hermora's guidance when exploring ancient mysteries. Namira represents perhaps the most dramatic theological reinterpretation among the Khajiit. While other cultures view Namira primarily as a repulsive entity associated with decay, Khajiit theology positions her as the Great Darkness, a fundamental cosmic force in opposition to the light of Azura. The Dro-Mathra, corrupted Khajiit souls who serve Namira, feature prominently in cultural cautionary tales. Among the most misunderstood practitioners of Daedra worship are the Reachmen, whose ancient traditions predate even the establishment of the First Empire. The Reachmen venerate a pantheon that includes both unique regional spirits and recognizable Daedric princes, particularly Hircin and Namira. Unlike the secretive cults of urbanized Tamriel, Reach folk worship occurs openly within their communities, with hag ravens serving as primary religious authorities and intermediaries between the people and their divine patrons. Her scene holds particular significance for the Reach folk, who view his lycanthropic blessing not as a curse, but as a sacred gift that connects recipients to primal, natural forces. The Reachmen's hunting rituals incorporate elements clearly derived from Hircine worship, including the ceremonial wearing of antlers, ritual scarification, and the practice of consuming specific organs from powerful prey to absorb their strength. These practices demonstrate how thoroughly Daedric principles have integrated into everyday reachful cultural practices rather than remaining separate religious observances. The Briarheart ritual represents perhaps the most distinctive reachfolk religious practice associated with Daedric influence. In this ceremony, a chosen warrior's heart is removed and replaced with a Briarheart, a magical seed infused with nature energies. This transformation, overseen by hagravens with suspected connections to Namira or Hircine, creates warriors of tremendous strength and endurance who serve as elite defenders of Reach settlements. The persecution of Daedra worshippers has occurred throughout Tamrielic history with varying intensity across different eras and regions. The Alessian Order, established following the rebellion against Ayleid rule, instituted some of the earliest and most severe prohibitions against Daedric worship. The doctrinal text, the exclusionary mandates, explicitly condemned all non-Alessian religious practices, with particular emphasis on Daedra worship due to its association with the overthrown Ayleid slave masters. During the height of Alessian influence, practitioners of Daedric rituals faced imprisonment, confiscation of property, and in extreme cases, execution. The methods employed by the Alessian Order to identify Daedra worshippers included both mundane investigation and magical techniques. Specially trained priests, known as expositors, carried enchanted censers that allegedly changed color in the presence of Daedric influence. The rise of the Septim Empire brought a more nuanced approach to religious regulation. Under Tiber Septim, the imperial policy shifted toward tolerance of private worship, while maintaining prohibitions against public Daedric ceremonies. This compromise reflected practical political considerations as the empire expanded to include provinces like Morrowind, where Daedra worship was culturally integrated. The imperial cult, which spread throughout the provinces following Septim's conquests, took a more educational approach to combating Daedric influence. Rather than relying primarily on punishment, cult missionaries emphasized the benefits of Daedric worship and the dangers of Daedric pacts. The influential text, Spirits of Nirn, Your Children, presented Daedric entities as parental figures concerned with mortal welfare, contrasting them with Daedric princes, characterized as manipulative entities, seeking only to exploit their followers. Despite these efforts, Daedric worship persisted throughout the empire, adapting to circumstances through increasingly secretive and sophisticated practices. Urban Daedric cults developed elaborate codes and recognition signals to identify fellow worshippers safely. The cult of Sanguine in the Imperial City, for instance, operated under the guise of a wine appreciation society, with members using specific phrases when ordering drinks to signal their affiliation. The offerings and rituals associated with different Daedric princes vary tremendously, reflecting their diverse spheres and interests. Offerings to Azura typically include dawn-blooming and dusk-blooming flowers arranged in patterns representing the transitions between day and night. Her rituals emphasize personal transformation and the acceptance of change, often incorporating elements of self-reflection and meditation. Boethiah's followers practice more physically demanding rituals centered around combat and competition. Traditional offerings include weapons taken from defeated enemies, particularly those who held positions of authority. The most significant Boethiah ceremony, the Tournament of 10 Bloods, involves ritualized combat between representatives of the 10 main races of Tamriel, with the victor earning the right to hear Boethiah's voice directly. Clavicus Vile's worship centers around contractual relationships and bargaining. Offerings typically include luxury items that represent what the worshipper values most, demonstrating willingness to sacrifice for Vile's favor. His rituals involve the precise wording of requests, with followers carefully crafting their petitions to minimize potential misinterpretation. Hermaeus Mora receives offerings of knowledge rather than material goods. His followers transcribe unique information, personal secrets, or obscure facts onto specially prepared scrolls that are then ritually destroyed, typically by submersion in ink or burial in library foundations. The destruction represents the knowledge passing into Mora's realm of Apocrypha. More dedicated cultists practice memory offerings, in which they use specialized alteration magic to extract specific memories from their own minds as offerings, creating permanent gaps in their personal history that belong solely to the prince. The holy days observed by Daedric cults often correspond to astronomical or seasonal events significant to their prince's sphere. The Night of Green Fire, sacred to Sheogorath, occurs during the vernal equinox when Secunda completely covers Masser, creating a ring of light believed to represent the portal to the Shivering Isles. During this night, Sheogorath's followers engage in activities that invert normal social order, speaking only in questions, wearing clothing inside out, or deliberately performing tasks backward. These seemingly nonsensical practices reflect the prince's domain of madness, while also containing deeper symbolic significance related to challenging established patterns of thought. Molag Bal's followers observe the coldest night, typically falling in evening star, with rituals focused on domination and the breaking of will. These ceremonies often involve trials of endurance, where participants demonstrate their strength by overcoming increasingly difficult physical challenges. The most devoted cultists participate in the Binding of Eight, where they are restrained in progressively more uncomfortable positions while reciting The 8 Steps to Domination, a liturgical text outlining Molag Bal's philosophy of power. Those who complete the ritual without requesting release are considered to have received the prince's blessing. Meridia's day of cleansing occurs at the summer solstice, when daylight reaches its maximum duration. Her followers use this period of extended light to hunt undead and cleanse areas tainted by necromancy. The ritual involves the use of specially consecrated weapons bathed in the first light of the solstice day, and the collection of soil from purified grave sites. This soil is then mixed with crushed crystals and formed into amulets that supposedly protect against undead influence. Unlike many Daedric observances that occur in secret, Meridia's holy day sometimes receives tacit approval from local authorities due to its focus on eliminating undead threats. The Daedric artifacts stand as perhaps the most tangible manifestations of the prince's influence on Nirn. Unlike the ephemeral nature of summoned Daedra, or the temporary effects of magical intervention, these objects persist in the mortal realm, passing from hand to hand throughout history, while carrying fragments of their creator's essence. Each artifact functions not merely as a powerful magical tool, but as an extension of its prince's will, a physical anchor for their influence that circumvents the liminal barriers separating Oblivion from Mundus. Azura's star represents one of the most sought-after Daedric artifacts due to its practical utility for enchanters and mages. Unlike conventional soul gems that shatter after a single use, this crystalline vessel can capture and hold souls repeatedly without degradation. The star's physical form, an intricate geometric crystal with an interior space that appears vastly larger than its exterior dimensions, reflects Azura's association with liminality and transition. The souls contained within experience a twilight state, neither fully in Mundus nor completely drawn to their final destination. The metaphysical structure of Azura's star reveals much about the prince's approach to mortal interaction. Unlike soul gems created through mortal enchantment, which function purely as containers, the star establishes a connection between the captured soul and Azura herself. Mages who have studied the artifact report that souls within the star experience dreams sent directly from Moonshadow, Azura's realm. These dreams often contain prophetic elements or subtle guidance that serves the prince's inscrutable purposes. This connection explains why the star cannot typically contain black souls. Azura's design specifically prevents direct competition with the soul-claiming practices of other princes. The ebony mail associated with Bothia exemplifies how Daedric artifacts often reflect their creator's sphere through both form and function. This suit of armor, forged from ebony with distinctive crimson patterns flowing across its surface, surrounds its wearer with a toxic miasma that poisons nearby enemies. This effect manifests both Thea's association with assassination and secret plots, allowing the wearer to eliminate opponents without direct confrontation. The armor's additional ability to muffle movement further enhances this stealthy approach, encouraging tactics that align with Boethia's philosophy of victory through cunning rather than brute force. The creation of the ebony mail, according to Dunmer historical texts, occurred shortly after Boethia's consumption of Trinimac. The armor allegedly incorporates fragments of Trinimac's own divine armor, transformed through Boethia's digestive processes and reshaped to serve entirely different purposes. Throughout recorded history, the ebony mail has appeared during periods of significant political upheaval. The Comoran usurper allegedly wore the mail during his conquest of Valenwood, while Queen Berenzia's bodyguard possessed it briefly during the Imperial Simulacrum. In each case, the artifact seemingly sought individuals positioned to dramatically alter existing power structures, regardless of their moral alignment or ultimate goals. A Mace of Molag Bal manifests its creator's sphere of domination in more direct fashion. This heavy spiked weapon drains its victim's spiritual energy while simultaneously attacking their physical form. Those struck by the mace describe a sensation of their very will being siphoned away, a metaphysical violation that mirrors Molag Bal's fundamental nature. The mace's ability to trap souls further emphasizes this connection, allowing its wielder to claim absolute dominion over defeated opponents by denying them even the release of proper death. The physical appearance of the mace reflects its sinister purpose. The weapon's head features multiple barbed spikes arranged in patterns that scholars have identified as representing mathematical formulas for spiritual binding. The handle incorporates materials allegedly harvested from Cold Harbor itself, including metal from the chains used to bind soul-shriven servants in Molag Bal's personal fortress. These components create a direct connection to Bal's realm, allowing the mace to function as a conduit through which portions of victims' spiritual essence flow directly to Cold Harbor. The Wabbajack, Sheogorath's infamous staff, embodies the unpredictable nature of its creator through its chaotic transmutation effects. Unlike artifacts with consistent, predictable functions, the Wabbajack transforms targets randomly, turning enemies into harmless animals, summoning lesser Daedra, or even causing spontaneous combustion without discernible pattern. This unpredictability reflects Sheogorath's fear of madness, specifically his interest in disrupting established patterns and forcing both wielder and target to confront fundamental uncertainty. The staff's physical form incorporates 3 faces, displaying different emotional states: maniacal laughter, stoic neutrality, and abject terror. These expressions represent the range of reactions to madness itself, from embrace to resistance. Mehrunes' razor exemplifies the dangerous allure of Daedric artifacts through its deceptively simple function. This dagger, associated with Mehrunes' Dagon, appears physically unremarkable compared to more obviously supernatural artifacts. Its blade resembles high-quality ebony with subtle red patterning, while its hilt features modest ornamentation that varies somewhat between historical appearances. This relatively mundane appearance belies the razor's extraordinary capability. The chance to sever the connection between body and soul with even a minor cut, causing instant death regardless of the target's power or protections. The metaphysical principles behind Mehrunes' razor reveal much about Dagon's sphere of destruction and revolution. Unlike conventional weapons that must overcome a target's physical defenses, the razor attacks the fundamental metaphysical connection that binds soul to flesh. This approach reflects Dagon's interest in destroying established structures at their foundational level, rather than merely damaging their outer manifestations. The skeleton key of Nocturnal stands as perhaps the most metaphysically complex of the major Daedric artifacts. While superficially appearing as an unbreakable lockpick capable of opening any conventional lock, the key's true purpose extends far beyond this mundane function. According to texts recovered from Nightingale Hall, the skeleton key can unlock abstract barriers within its wielder's mind, removing limitations on skill development and innate potential. This function reflects Nocturnal's association with hidden potential and the removal of obstacles to achievement. The physical form of the skeleton key shifts subtly depending on its wielder's perception, appearing differently to each observer while maintaining certain consistent elements. The shaft always incorporates materials that absorb light rather than reflecting it, creating the impression of a void in the shape of a key. The relationship between the skeleton key and the Thieves' Guild exemplifies how Daedric artifacts can become integrated into mortal organizations over extended periods. While the guild itself does not universally worship Nocturnal, the specialized Nightingale faction within it maintains a formalized relationship with the Prince, offering service in exchange for the use of her artifacts and blessings. Beyond these well-known artifacts exist numerous lesser-known but equally significant Daedric tools. The Spear of Bitter Mercy, associated with Hircine, appears during the Prince's wild hunt as a weapon capable of piercing any hide or armor. Unlike conventional spears, the weapon can shift its length and form according to the wielder's hunting needs, sometimes manifesting as a javelin for throwing, other times as a longer pike for mounted hunting. Volendrung, the massive hammer associated with Malakath, embodies its creator's concern with the outcasts and the betrayed. Originally created by the Dwemer as a mining tool, the hammer was used to locate the site of Volenfell before being claimed by Malakath after the Dwemer's disappearance. This history of repurposing, taking an abandoned tool and transforming it into a weapon of vengeance, reflects Malakath's own transformation from Trinimac and his adoption of the betrayed Orsimer as his chosen people. The hammer's ability to drain stamina from those it strikes represents Malakath's philosophy that strength should be taken from the unworthy and bestowed upon those who prove themselves through struggle. Physically, Volendrung features a massive head with Daedric inscriptions that continuously shift to display the names of those who have betrayed the hammer's current wielder, encouraging the pursuit of vengeance against specific targets. The Ring of Namira demonstrates how even seemingly minor Daedric artifacts can exert significant influence through psychological rather than directly magical means. This unassuming silver band grants its wearer increased stamina and resistance to poison. Modest benefits compared to the dramatic effects of other artifacts. However, the ring's true power lies in its ability to make the consumption of dead flesh appear not merely acceptable, but desirable to its wearer. This subtle influence reflects Namira's approach to corruption, not through dramatic transformation, but through the gradual acceptance of the repulsive. The ring doesn't force its wearer to engage in cannibalism, but rather removes the natural aversion to such practices, allowing the individual to willingly embrace behaviors they would normally find abhorrent. The Ogma Infinium, associated with Hermaeus Mora, stands as perhaps the most overtly dangerous Daedric artifact due to its direct transmission of forbidden knowledge. This bound tome, allegedly crafted from the skin of elven sages and inscribed with ink mixed from their blood, contains knowledge spanning multiple disciplines, from martial techniques to arcane secrets. Those who read the book report experiencing lifetimes of training compressed into moments, gaining skills that would normally require decades of dedicated study. The physical properties of the Ogma Infinium defy conventional material analysis. The pages appear to contain different information depending on the reader's interests and abilities, customizing its contents to maximize impact on the specific individual. The book cannot be copied through any known, magical, or mundane means. Attempts to transcribe its contents result in meaningless text that fades within hours of being written. These properties ensure that the knowledge contained within remains rare and controlled, creating competition among those who seek access. The fundamental nature of Daedric pacts extends far beyond simple transactions. These agreements represent complex, metaphysical contracts that bind both mortal and immortal participants through forces that transcend conventional magical constraints. Unlike typical enchantments or spells that can be dispelled through countermeasures, true Daedric pacts incorporate elements of cosmic law that even the princes themselves must respect once terms are established. The simplest form of Daedric pact involves straightforward exchange. A mortal performs a service or provides an offering, and the prince grants a specific boon in return. The infamous case of Darkblade the Usurper illustrates this basic arrangement. In the Third Era, this minor Breton noble sought Clavicus Vile's assistance in claiming the throne of Camlorn. Historical records indicate that Darkblade offered the prince a family heirloom, a jeweled dagger that had been used in royal coronations for 7 generations. In exchange, Vile provided information about secret passages beneath the castle that allowed Darkblade to bypass the main defenses. This transaction, while relatively simple in structure, contained subtle complexities typical of Vile's arrangements. The secret passages indeed existed, but Darkblade failed to ask about potential guardians within those passages. His forces encountered ancient Dwemer defenses that decimated his small group of conspirators. Darkblade himself reached the throne room only to be captured by the very guards he thought he had circumvented. This outcome exemplifies how Daedric pacts, particularly those with Clavicus Vile, fulfill their literal terms while subverting the participants' expectations through careful exploitation of unspecified details. More complex pacts involve conditional arrangements that extend over time or multiple generations. The Blackwood Company of Leowin entered such an agreement with Hermaeus Mora during the late Third Era. According to Imperial intelligence reports, the company's leadership sought enhanced combat capabilities for their mercenaries to compete with the Fighters Guild. Mora provided a specialized form of hist sap that dramatically increased physical capabilities when ingested. The conditions of this pact required the company to transcribe all observations of the sap's effects, including detailed accounts of hallucinations experienced by users and physiological changes noted in long-term consumption. These records were to be bound in specially prepared books and buried at specific locations throughout Blackwood, creating a network of knowledge caches accessible to Mora's influence. This arrangement served the prince's primary interest in collecting and preserving knowledge, while providing the mercenary company with their desired enhancement, regardless of its ultimately destructive consequences. The most elaborate Daedric pacts involve soul-binding agreements that extend beyond mortal lifespans. The Nightingales of Nocturnal represent perhaps the most well-documented example of such arrangements. Members of this specialized faction within the Thieves' Guild pledge not only their living service, but also commit their souls to Nocturnal's service in the Evergloam after death. In exchange, they receive supernatural abilities related to stealth, shadow manipulation, and luck that significantly exceed conventional magical enhancements. The metaphysical mechanics of this soul-binding process involve what Master Wizard Finaster described as essence tethering, the creation of metaphysical cords that connect the mortal soul directly to the prince's realm. Unlike soul trapping, which captures the entire soul upon death, these tethers allow the prince to gradually draw upon the mortal's essence during life, while ensuring complete collection upon death. The process creates distinctive magical signatures, detectable by specialized mysticism spells, which the vigilance of Stendar have used to identify individuals with active Daedric pacts. The language used in formalizing Daedric pacts carries tremendous significance. Unlike mundane contracts, where intent can sometimes override precise wording, Daedric agreements operate on principles of absolute literalism. The exact terms spoken during the pact's creation define the boundaries of obligation for both parties, with no room for later reinterpretation. This precision explains why Daedric summoning rituals typically include extensive protective clauses and carefully structured requests. The case of Magister Theodosius of the Synod demonstrates the importance of precise language. In the Fourth Era, Theodosius sought Mehrunes Dagon's assistance in destroying political rivals within the organization. The Magister requested the power to overcome all who stand against me in the Synod chambers. Dagon granted this request exactly as stated, providing Theodosius with an uncontrollable fire-based ability that activated whenever he entered the council chambers. The resulting conflagration killed not only his rivals, but also his allies and Theodosius himself, while causing extensive damage to irreplaceable arcane documents. Historical analysis of documented Daedric pacts reveals significant variation in how different princes approach these agreements. Azura typically offers straightforward terms with minimal hidden consequences, though she often includes requirements for the mortal to spread her worship or influence. Boethia's pacts frequently involve tests of strength or cunning before full benefits are granted, reflecting the prince's interest in promoting competition and proving worth. Hermaeus Mora constructs elaborate, multi-layered agreements where initial benefits reveal further opportunities for deeper pacts, creating a progression that gradually increases the mortal's dependency on the prince's knowledge. Molag Bal's pacts stand among the most overtly exploitative, often beginning with seemingly modest terms before expanding through coercive additions. The Journal of Serana Volkahar, recovered from a shrine near Winterhold, describes how her initial agreement to perform a single service for the prince evolved into perpetual servitude through incremental escalation. Each task completed led to demands for increasingly morally compromising actions, with threats of punishment for non-compliance based on the initial acceptance. This pattern of escalating commitment represents a common approach through which princes convert simple transactions into comprehensive soul claims. The legal status of Daedric pacts varies significantly across Tamriel's jurisdictions. Imperial law technically classifies all binding agreements with Daedric entities as illegal under the Daedric Prohibition Act, which states that no subject of the Empire shall enter into contractual or binding spiritual arrangements with entities of Oblivion. In practice, enforcement of this law has proven inconsistent, with exceptions frequently granted for scholarly purposes or when pacts serve imperial interests. Morrowind's legal approach to Daedric pacts evolved dramatically following the fall of the Tribunal. Under Temple law during the Tribunal era, pacts with the Anticipations received official sanction, while agreements with other princes faced severe punishment. The new temple, established after the Red Year, adopted more nuanced regulations, recognizing the legitimacy of pacts with any of the reclamations, while maintaining prohibitions against other princes. House Telvanni territories, however, have historically ignored such restrictions entirely, viewing Daedric interaction as a private matter outside governmental jurisdiction. The metaphysical consequences of breaking Daedric pacts extend far beyond conventional contractual penalties. When a mortal violates agreed terms, the backlash typically manifests through what Archmage Shalador termed essence rebound, a process where the energies invested in the pact return to their source in destructive fashion. Physical symptoms range from relatively minor afflictions like persistent nightmares or sensory hallucinations to catastrophic consequences, including spontaneous combustion or rapid aging. The case of Countess Alessia Caro of Leowin provides a well-documented example of pact violation consequences. Historical records indicate that the Countess entered an agreement with Vermina, receiving the ability to access her political rival's dreams in exchange for establishing a secret shrine in the castle dungeons. When Imperial investigators discovered and destroyed the shrine, the Countess immediately began experiencing her own worst fears manifested in physical form. Guards reported witnessing insects crawling beneath her skin, and spontaneous wounds appearing that matched her dream injuries. She died within a week. Her body aged to that of a woman 3 times her actual age. Beyond immediate personal consequences, broken pacts often affect the violator's bloodline through generational curses. The Draconis family of High Rock broke a pact with Mephala in the early Second Era, when family patriarch Gaston Draconis failed to sacrifice his youngest daughter, as promised. For 8 generations afterward, every female child born to the family developed arachnid characteristics upon reaching puberty, eventually transforming completely into Spider Daedra. This curse persisted until the last family descendant fulfilled the original pact by willingly surrendering herself to Mephala's realm. The fate of souls promised to Daedric princes represents one of the most significant long-term consequences of certain pacts. Unlike conventional afterlife destinations, such as the Dream Sleeve or Aetherius, souls claimed by Daedric princes become permanently incorporated into their realms, often serving specific functions determined by the original agreement. The metaphysical mechanics of this process involve what the Sigic order terms planar reassignment, the fundamental retuning of the soul's resonance frequency to match the prince's realm rather than its natural destination. Souls within Daedric realms experience widely varying fates depending on the prince who claims them. Those promised to Azura typically enjoy relatively pleasant existence in Moonshadow, serving as attendants or messengers while retaining most of their personality and awareness. Souls claimed by Molag Bal face perpetual torment in Cold Harbor, often transformed into soul-shriven servants, stripped of identity and hope. Hermaeus Mora preserves claimed souls with perfect fidelity, but puts them to use, organizing and cataloging his endless library for eternity, their memories and knowledge becoming part of his collection. The possibility of escaping Daedric soul claims has generated extensive theological debate. The priests of Arche maintain that no Daedric claim can truly override the fundamental Aedric patterns established during Mundus's creation, suggesting that sufficient divine intervention can release claimed souls. Evidence supporting this position includes the documented case of Fiori the Nord, whose soul was reclaimed from Molag Bal through an elaborate ritual performed by priests of Arche. The ritual required 16 priests working simultaneously and consumed rare materials, including Harkwood from an original Elder Gleam cutting, but successfully returned Fiori's soul to the conventional afterlife cycle. Conversely, Daedric cultists argue that properly formulated soul pacts create irrevocable changes to the soul's fundamental nature. The Apocrypha of Xarxes contains passages suggesting that souls promised to princes undergo gradual transformation that eventually makes them unsuitable for any destination other than their contracted realm. This text describes the process as essential realignment, where the very composition of the soul shifts to resonate with its destined plane of oblivion, eventually becoming indistinguishable from native Daedric entities. Throughout the tumultuous history of Tamriel, few events have proven as catastrophic as direct Daedric invasions. These cataclysmic incursions represent moments when the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion weaken or fail entirely, allowing Daedric entities to manifest their full power within the mortal realm. From the plane meld of the Second Era to the Oblivion crisis that marked the end of the Septim Dynasty, these events have reshaped political landscapes, transformed cultures, and left psychological scars that persist for generations. The earliest documented major Daedric invasion occurred during the mid-Second Era, when Molag Bal attempted to merge Nirn with his realm of Cold Harbor in an event known as the Plane Meld. This catastrophic scheme began following the collapse of the Second Empire and the eruption of the Three Banners, exploiting Tamriel's political fragmentation. Molag Bal's cultists enacted a ritual that shattered the barriers between realms, allowing massive dark anchors, enormous Daedric constructs resembling chains and hooks, to physically drag portions of Nirn into Cold Harbor. The metaphysical mechanics of the plane meld differed significantly from later Daedric invasions. Rather than simply opening portals between realms, Molag Bal attempted a fundamental merging of planar structures, a process that Imperial battle mages later described as cosmic absorption. The dark anchors served as physical manifestations of this process, creating localized areas where Cold Harbor's reality gradually overwrote Nirn's natural laws. Within these zones, water transformed into blood, plant life withered into Cold Harbor's characteristic twisted vegetation, and the very sky took on the leaden hue of Molag Bal's realm. The plane meld's initial success stemmed from Molag Bal's acquisition of the Amulet of Kings, the powerful Daedric artifact that normally reinforced the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion. By capturing the soul of Emperor Varen Aquilarios within Cold Harbor and corrupting the amulet's power, Bal created what scholars termed a reverse Dragonfire's effect, using the amulet to weaken rather than strengthen the dimensional boundaries. The defense against the plane meld required unprecedented cooperation among Tamriel's typically fractious factions. The Fighters Guild, led by Seize All Colors, shifted its entire operational focus to destroying dark anchors, while the Mages Guild, under Vanus Galarian, developed specialized countermeasures against Cold Harbor magic. Most significantly, the Vestige, a mortal soul-shriven who had escaped from Cold Harbor, united these desperate efforts and eventually led an assault into Molag Bal's realm itself. This counter-invasion of Cold Harbor represents one of the most audacious military operations in Tamrielic history. Using a specialized portal created by the Mages Guild, a coalition force penetrated Molag Bal's realm directly, establishing a beachhead from which to assault the Daedric Prince's center of power. The metaphysical challenges of this operation went beyond conventional warfare. Mortal bodies had to be specially prepared to withstand Cold Harbor's hostile environment, and complex magical shielding protected the invasion force from Molag Bal's direct attention. The climactic confrontation occurred within the planar vortex, the metaphysical nexus where Cold Harbor and Nirn were being forcibly merged. Here, the Vestige and their allies confronted Molag Bal directly, using a weapon forged from Daedric light called the Amulet of Kings to defeat the prince and reverse the plane meld process. This victory did not destroy Molag Bal, as Daedric princes cannot be truly killed, but it did force him to abandon his immediate plans for Nirn and retreat to recover his strength. The aftermath of the plane meld left lasting physical and metaphysical scars across Tamriel. Regions where dark anchors had descended experienced persistent magical anomalies, with some areas never fully recovering their natural properties. More significantly, the event fundamentally altered how Tamrielic societies approached Daedric threats. The Fighters Guild maintained specialized anchor response units for decades afterward, while the Mages Guild compiled extensive documentation on Cold Harbor magic that would later prove invaluable during subsequent Daedric incursions. Nearly 8 centuries after the plane meld, Tamriel faced an even more devastating Daedric invasion during the Oblivion crisis. Unlike Molag Bal's attempt at planar merger, Mehrunes Dagon pursued a more direct approach: the establishment of permanent portals between Nirn and his Deadlands, allowing his armies to physically occupy and eventually destroy the mortal realm. This invasion strategy reflected Dagon's sphere of destruction and revolution, prioritizing immediate violence over the more gradual absorption attempted by Molag Bal. The metaphysical mechanism enabling the Oblivion crisis centered on the dragon fires, the ritual flames in the Temple of the One that symbolized and reinforced the covenant between Akatosh and the Dragonborn Emperors, when assassins from the mythic Dawn cult murdered Emperor Uriel Septim VII and his known heirs. The dragonfires extinguished, substantially weakening the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion. This vulnerability allowed Mehrunes Dagon's servants to establish stable Oblivion gates across Tamriel. The Oblivion gates themselves represented remarkable examples of trans-dimensional architecture. Each gate formed a self-sustaining portal anchored by a sigil stone, a specialized Daedric artifact that maintained the connection between realms. Within the Deadlands, these connections terminated at massive structures called sigil towers, where the sigil stones were housed in specialized chambers at the tower's peaks. This arrangement created a vulnerability that mortal defenders eventually exploited. Removing the sigil stone from its chamber collapsed the associated gate and severed the connection between realms. The strategic placement of these gates demonstrated Mehrunes Dagon's understanding of Tamrielic politics and infrastructure. Initial gates appeared near major population centers like Kvatch, creating maximum terror and disruption of Imperial response capabilities. Secondary gates targeted key transportation nodes and military installations, systematically undermining the Empire's ability to coordinate defensive efforts. Later gates emerged in seemingly random locations, forcing Imperial forces to disperse rather than concentrate their counterattacks. The Daedric forces that emerged from these gates exhibited clear, tactical organization rather than mere chaotic violence. Dremora commanders led specialized units with distinct battlefield roles. Scanner teams identified defensive weaknesses. Shock troops exploited these vulnerabilities. And occupation forces established forward bases from which to launch deeper incursions. This military sophistication surprised Imperial commanders who had expected disorganized hordes rather than disciplined invasion forces, operating with clear strategic objectives. The material composition of these invading forces provided crucial insights into Daedric manifestation mechanics. Unlike summoned Daedra, who typically appear on Nirn through conjuration magic, the entities emerging from Oblivion gates retained their full Daedric essence. This distinction meant they possessed substantially greater power than conventionally summoned counterparts, while still maintaining their immortal nature. Killed Daedra simply reformed in the Deadlands, rather than being banished permanently. Countermeasures against the Oblivion crisis developed through painful trial and error. Initial attempts to close gates through conventional magical means proved ineffective, as the sigil stone's unique properties resisted standard dispelling techniques. The Mages Guild eventually identified the crucial weakness in the gate structure. But implementing this knowledge required physical infiltration of the Deadlands, essentially requiring counter-invasion teams to enter each gate, fight through Daedric defenses, and manually remove the sigil stone. The most effective mortal response emerged in Bruma, where Countess Narina Carvain and the hero of Kvatch organized a multi-provincial defensive coalition. Representatives from each major city contributed soldiers experienced in gate-closing operations, creating specialized strike teams capable of neutralizing Oblivion gates with minimal casualties. This cooperative approach represented a significant evolution in anti-Daedric tactics, prioritizing targeted, high-value operations over conventional military engagements, where Daedric forces held substantial advantages. The Oblivion crisis reached its climax when Mehrunes Dagon himself physically manifested in the Imperial City, an unprecedented event that bypassed even the weakened dimensional barriers. This direct manifestation occurred after the Mythic Dawn opened a specialized Great Gate within the Temple District, creating a portal large enough for Dagon's true form to enter Mundus. Standing taller than the White Gold Tower itself, Dagon's manifestation represented the most direct Daedric intrusion into Nirn since the Dawn era. The resolution of the crisis came through Martin Septim's sacrifice in the Temple of the One. By shattering the Amulet of Kings, the ancient Aedric artifact that had sealed the covenant between Akatosh and Alessia, Martin triggered a metaphysical reaction that summoned an avatar of Akatosh into physical form. This manifestation represented the most direct Aedric intervention in mortal affairs since the Dawn era, creating a momentary but perfect counterbalance to Dagon's presence. The battle between Akatosh's avatar and Mehrunes Dagon fundamentally altered Tamriel's metaphysical structure. When Akatosh banished Dagon back to Oblivion, the victory did more than end the immediate crisis. It established a permanent barrier between Mundus and Oblivion that no longer required the Dragonfire's ritual for maintenance. This dragon barrier, as scholars later termed it, represented a fundamental evolution in Nirn's metaphysical defenses, shifting from an active ritual requirement to a passive, self-sustaining protection. The socio-political aftermath of the Oblivion crisis proved as significant as its metaphysical consequences. The Septim dynasty ended with Martin's sacrifice, creating a political vacuum that the Elder Council struggled to fill. This imperial weakness accelerated provincial independence movements, particularly in Black Marsh, where the Anzeliel used their successful defense against the Oblivion Gates to justify political separation from the Empire. Within a generation, the relatively unified Tamriel of the Third Era had fractured into increasingly independent regions. Cultural responses to the crisis manifested differently across provinces. In Cyrodiil, new religious movements emerged, venerating Martin Septim as a divine figure alongside Tiber Septim, creating theological tensions with traditional imperial cult structures. Skyrim experienced a resurgence of traditional Nord religious practices, with many communities abandoning imperial divines worship in favor of the older Nordic pantheon that emphasized strength against external threats. These cultural shifts reflected how societies processed the collective trauma of Daedric invasion. Beyond these major invasions, Tamriel has experienced numerous smaller-scale Daedric incursions throughout its history. During the late Merethic era, Molag Bal attempted to establish a permanent foothold in Bankarai through the construction of a specialized dark gateway. This early invasion was thwarted by the legendary hero Frandar Hunding, who sacrificed himself to seal the gateway using ancient Redguard binding magic. The site later became a pilgrimage destination for Redguard warriors who would renew the seals through blood offerings on specific astronomical dates. The Valenwood walking city of Falinesti experienced a localized Daedric incursion when cultists of Vermina established a specialized dream gate within the city's central Gratoke. Unlike conventional Oblivion portals, this connection operated primarily through mental pathways, allowing Vermina's influence to spread through shared dreams rather than physical manifestation. The Bosmer spinners eventually countered this subtle invasion by creating a specialized dream song that re-established the boundaries between waking and dreaming reality. The metaphysical principles underlying these various Daedric invasions reveal consistent patterns despite their different manifestations. All successful incursions exploit weaknesses in what the First Era mage Mankar Cameron termed the liminal membrane, the metaphysical barrier separating Mundus from Oblivion. These weaknesses typically emerge during periods of significant disruption to established power structures, particularly those with divine or semi-divine foundations. The assassination of the Septim lineage, the disruption of the Dragonfires, and the interregnum following the fall of the Second Empire all created conditions where this membrane thinned sufficiently for Daedric exploitation. The specific mechanisms used to breach these barriers vary according to each prince's sphere and methodology. Molag balls, dark anchors, represented literal chains of domination, physically dragging reality into compliance with his will. Mehrunes Dagon's Oblivion gates manifested as fiery portals of revolutionary transformation, creating pathways for destructive change to flow from his realm into Mundus. Vermina's dream gates exploited the natural connection between mortal subconsciousness and her realm of quagmire. These manifestations physically embody each prince's conceptual nature. Mortal defenses against Daedric incursion have evolved substantially throughout Tamrielic history. The earliest known systematic protection emerged with the Dragonfire's Covenant, established during the Alessian Rebellion. This arrangement required the ritual lighting of sacred fires by a dragonborn emperor, creating a metaphysical barrier specifically designed to prevent direct Daedric manifestation while still allowing controlled summoning through conjuration magic. This balanced approach reflected Alessia's pragmatic recognition that complete separation from Oblivion would harm legitimate magical research and practice. The Psijic Order developed more specialized protective measures following their withdrawal to Artaeum, using techniques that combined tonal architecture principles with conventional magical barriers. The Psijics established what they termed harmonic exclusion fields around their island, protections that operated by creating metaphysical dissonance with Oblivion frequencies, making Artaeum fundamentally inhospitable to Daedric manifestation. The most comprehensive anti-Daedric protection system emerged through the Cold Harbor Compact, negotiated by Sotha Sil in the early First Era. This metaphysical agreement bound 8 of the most dangerous Daedric princes to specific limitations regarding direct intervention in mortal affairs. While the exact terms remain unknown to most scholars, the compact clearly prohibited wholesale invasion of Nirn, while permitting more limited interactions through summoning, artifacts, and individual champions. This nuanced approach recognized the impossibility of completely severing connections between realms, while establishing boundaries for acceptable interaction. The effectiveness of the compact has varied throughout history. During periods of tribunal strength, the agreement's constraints remained relatively firm, with princes limited to indirect influence rather than direct manifestation. As tribunal power waned following the loss of the Heart of Lorkhan, these constraints gradually weakened, allowing increased Daedric activity, culminating in the major invasions of the Second and Third Eras. This correlation suggests that the compact's enforcement relied, at least partially, on Sotha Sil's personal power, rather than being fully self-sustaining. And that brings us to the end of our epic journey through the realms of Oblivion and the complex relationships between Daedra and mortals. From the primordial forces of Anu and Padome to the catastrophic invasions that shaped Tamrielic history, we've explored how these enigmatic entities have influenced every aspect of existence on Nirn. The Daedra represent more than mere antagonists or sources of power. They embody fundamental aspects of change, chaos, and possibility that stand in eternal opposition to the ordered structure of mortal reality. Their spheres of influence touch every corner of Tamrielic culture, from the ancestor worship of the Dunmer to the secretive cults operating in the shadows of imperial cities. Whether through their artifacts that carry fragments of divine essence, their realms that defy mortal understanding, or their complex pacts that bind souls across lifetimes, the Daedric princes continue to shape the destiny of Tamriel in ways both subtle and profound. As we've seen, the relationship between Daedra and mortals is one of constant tension and mutual fascination. The princes offer power, knowledge, and fulfillment of desires, but always at a cost that reflects their alien nature and agenda. The mortals who seek their favor do so knowing the risks, driven by ambition, desperation, or simple curiosity about forces beyond their comprehension. The great invasions remind us that this relationship exists in a delicate balance. When that balance is disrupted, whether through the weakening of ancient barriers or the machinations of ambitious cultists, the consequences can reshape entire continents and alter the course of history itself. Yet, even in defeat, the Daedra remain. Their immortal nature ensures that every setback is temporary, every banishment merely a prelude to eventual return. They adapt, they learn, and they continue to find new ways to extend their influence into the mortal realm. Understanding the Daedra helps us understand the very nature of existence in the Elder Scrolls universe, a reality where order and chaos exist in constant tension, where mortality and immortality intersect in complex ways, and where the actions of individuals can have consequences that echo across planes of existence. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey through the mysteries of Oblivion. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Daedric lore, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more Elder Scrolls content. What aspect of Daedric influence would you like to explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. I love hearing from fellow lore enthusiasts. Until next time, may your travels through Tamriel be filled with wonder, and your encounters with the Daedra be, well, survivable. Take care, everyone.